there's a little bit of a delay, so we gotta.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I'll start with the intro.
Cool.
Well, hello YouTube. This is Kevin with the Weird Homes Tour. Hope you are doing well. As you know, here at the Weird Homes Tour, we like to do virtual home tours of unique and creative and eclectic homes all around the U.S. And every week we do one of these home tours with another home. So if you want to see more tours just like this, it's really easy to do. Just subscribe to the Weird Homes Tour on YouTube and hit the little bell for notifications. If you like what you see, drop us a like, comment, and all that fun stuff, and we will see you guys on the next one. This is being recorded, but we are also doing this as a live tour. So if you are joining us live, feel free to drop your comments in the little chat box, and we can get to it as we go. And this week, we're really happy and lucky to be joined by Divya in New York City, who does taxidermy. And that's something that I find really interesting and something that I learned a lot about getting ready for this interview. Now, Divya, for taxidermy, something that I learned is it's very ethical, very sustainable. Why don't you talk about that and what drew you into the art form?
Yeah, absolutely. So taxidermy nowadays is really ethical. It's very sustainable. It's a practice that's really based in conservation and an appreciation of animals and an appreciation of wildlife. And no matter what type of taxidermy practice there is, whether it's someone who is getting into it from, like a more traditional way of getting into it, which is not how I got into it. I got into it more from more from seeing it in art shows and things like that. And like collecting antiques and stuff. No matter how someone gets into taxidermy, no matter how much they practice it or what type of practice they have and what their focus is, one thing that unites all of us taxidermists is a love of animals and an appreciation of wildlife and conserving wildlife. So that's really, and especially now, it's not the same taxidermy as the 1800s. So especially nowadays, taxidermists are very mindful about where they source specimens, and they're very, they're very much about telling a story and creating a piece that will inspire the viewer and hopefully you all today to conserve wildlife and to protect animals.
Well, wonderful. Well, why don't you show us some of your wonderful taxidermy pieces?
Sure. So today I'm in my studio and I'm going to take a step back and turn the camera around so you can see my studio. So I live in New York City, so I don't have a ton of space. I have a lot of space for New York, but I don't have a ton of space compared to wherever everyone is tuning in from. So this room is about 10 by 10. And in it, during the daytime, there's a lot of really great light. Right in the center of it is my work desk. And at my work desk, you'll see a project that I currently have going. This is a Rosella, and I sort of use this turntable here to help work on, every angle of it. And this has already been mounted. So what I would be doing is using some of my tools here, my scissors. I have little swabs and applicators, and of course, lots of brushes. My favorite thing on this table is my junk drawer, which is this beautiful egg, this beautiful fabric egg, but it's not so much junk. It's just sort of trinkets that are put in there, just sort of things that, as artists, we do tend to hoard stuff. So I have random gems and eyes and stuff in there. Here are some modeling tools. I mainly use wax for sculpting. So here's just a big chunk of wax, measuring tape, a whole bunch of modeling tools, an alcohol lamp. So to melt the wax, I would fill this with denatured alcohol, light this up, and use one of these tools to, break pieces of wax off and melt it and sculpt it into shape. What I'm going to be working on soon for this guy is painting him. So you can see that he's been mounted, but his beak and feet are bright white. That's just a primer coat that will be painted to a more natural color. And the reason for that is that once an animal passes, once it's preserved through taxidermy, there is a loss of color. All the color fades, or it either fades or darkens, or it just becomes a lot more dull. It's not lifelike anymore, and that's just part of the preservation process. So we use paints and pigments to add it back in. And so the paints and pigments I have out right now are pan pastels, which actually work a lot like makeup. I really like them because I wear makeup. I'm very comfortable using makeup, and these things work a lot like that. And you can blend them really nicely and get a nice matte finish. But for when I need heavier or I need more opaque color, I use golden acrylic paints. And these are just like a high flow acrylic paint. And I like using, acrylic or water-based things because of, again, I'm in a small space and I don't really like having lots of fumes. Over here, right next to me, I've got this little display, this little shelf and display area. It's sort of, I've got really old pieces here. This fawn is one I mounted probably like 8 years ago. It's been so long. It's kind of funny to think about how long ago I mounted that. That's more of like a fantasy fairy tale type of scene. Right next to it is a sleeping parakeet. This one's in progress, so it's sort of this sleeping little budgie on a branch. I also like having a lot of plants around because, with a lot of, taxidermy is all about appreciating wildlife and appreciating nature. And I feel like plants sort of bring that love of natural history right home and kind of take it there. I also have started collecting antique books about birds. This book is called Bird Life by Frank Chapman, who was one of the first ornithologists at the American Museum of Natural History. And I'll open up to a page in here, hopefully with, last time I opened up, it opened up to a page with illustrations, but here we go. So you can see just how beautiful these illustrations are. And there are a lot of insights in here, especially some insights about conservation, which some of the ideas still, it's interesting how some of the ideas still hold up today and what's changed and what hasn't. So it's just one of those cool books I own. And then down here below, you can see where I store some of my paints. Because I'm in a small space, to avoid clutter or avoid seeing clutter, because as an artist, it's inevitable. You're going to use lots of materials and you're going to have lots of stuff. So what I do is just hide everything behind picture frames. It's still I still know what's there, but these are all like sculpting mediums and adhesives and solvents. So I don't have to see them. I just hide them all behind these picture frames. And right here is a little piece of lint or something. And then I have all my books and magazines that I use for reference. Here is just a bunch of antique stuff and some real and artificial flowers. Below here, I have some more trays of pan pastels over there. In all of these boxes, I have habitat material and flowers sort of color coded. They're kind of arranged by color. So those are all preserved flowers. Up here, I have some silk flowers, and these are ones I've made. And the reason for making flowers and making habitat material is that taxidermy doesn't always sit alone. It sits in a surrounding. So making greenery and flowers is a big part of taxidermy. This is an antique skeleton here. And this piece back here under the glass is actually not an antique. It's just a new piece made to look antique. And these are bats, but they're not real bats. It's probably, yeah, the light is better this way. These aren't real bats. These are replicas. And the reason for making replicas, it's actually part of taxidermy is to replicate life. But for making these, because of the trade in bats is very sort of a gray area. A lot of them are imported without any real clarity on what the sourcing is. I'm not comfortable with that. So I said, you know what, if people want bats in their homes, I can make a really good replica, and it can serve well as home decor or as a display piece and still convey the feeling and idea of what a bat is. And so I'll kind of go up this way too. But yeah, with the glare on the glass, it's kind of hard to see, but hopefully down here, you can really get close and see that they still have that feeling of bats. And then over here on this side, to make the most use of space, I've got my hanging birds. So I've got this toucan, which is actually going to be going to a client pretty soon. It's the keel-billed toucan. This was a domestically raised bird that passed away and came to me after that. This is a black-throated Magpie Jay, which is, a lot of people think it's a blue jay. It's a jay. It's in the same family, but it's a different type of jay. And this is a little mouse that is sort of contemplating its fate with this jay. What's going to happen? Who knows? And the one cool thing about this jay has got this amazing, amazing tail. Back there, those two little snakes you see are just some replica snakes that I've painted. And they're just, one's a replica coral snake and the other one is just a replica, like little black snake. And then here is one of my favorite pieces. So this is sort of this kind of replicates an antique automaton. So before we had cell phones and TV and, things like that, we would read books and be entertained by other things. This is sort of something that a very rich collector back in the days, a very worldly collector would have had one of these. They'd wind it up and it would sing. And so sort of this display was kind of made in reference to that, but with my twist, of course, on it, because of course this bird was collected responsibly and not taken from the wild. But I created this little nest with the eggs as part of this little tableau, a tiny journal back there. And what this bird does, if I turn the knob, which is kind of difficult to do with one hand, but here we go. But it tweets. I can kind of put this down and turn it again. Give me a minute. Okay. There we go. So it does tweet, and all of the mechanism in there is pretty old too. So the mechanism in there is from the 1800s. So that was, this is a piece I found that was in shambles really, and then I fixed it back up with my own pieces, with my own pieces. And then back to my desk. So back here behind my desk, I've just got my window. Of course, I've got an AC unit in there because again, it's New York. Most of us don't have central air. I just have my favorite books and artworks and things like that. During the day, this window gets tons of light coming in, which is good for me working and good for my plants. And yeah, I have some more books and things back there. And I'll turn the camera back around and we'll be going downstairs to my living room next. So if there are any questions in the meantime, I'll answer them.
Yeah, Divya, I was wondering, it looks like a lot of thought and care is put into how these pieces are presented. When you are created a piece, do you have an idea in mind before you get the specimen? Are you receiving a lot of requests from your clients, or are you inspired by the specimens that you get? What's the order of how you decide how you're going to display everything?
That's a really good question. And I'm sorry, the light's going to be changing a bit as I'm going through different rooms. But that's a really good question. I think the specimens are displayed sort of in the way that they're displayed in the way that kind of is dictated by the creature. So in some ways it's dictated by the creature because, animals, they don't live in a bubble. They live in, they live in nature. They live in, they live in these specific habitats. So there's that. And as a taxidermist too, I'm really trying to I think the mission of any taxidermist, the purpose of any taxidermist is kind of show nature at its best and tell a compelling story and tell a story that, that does right by the animal. And I think that is sort of what creates that is sort of what inspires the display. Because nature on its own is really beautiful. Like when you go into the woods, it wasn't planned. Things grow where they're supposed to grow. Animals adapt to their environment and how they're supposed to, they adapt to how they're supposed to live. So, as a human who makes artwork with animals, you're kind of, you kind of are thinking how do I put the animals first? And how do I kind of showcase them at their best while getting someone to want to care about these animals. And now we're in my living room, which during the day, this was much brighter, but at night it's a bit moody, which is nice. I can also turn on a brighter light so we can see some more. I think that might be, yeah, that'll be better. So Normally it's pretty moody lighting in here. When you come down into my living room, the first thing you see is this armoire, this cabinet. It's got tons of plants and stuff on it because, you know, as a collector of taxidermy, I love it for natural history reasons. You know, I love natural history and I love nature. So having the plants with the taxidermy really, you know, it really adds some layers, some texture, and plants. Like, who doesn't love plants in their home? So these are a lot of air plants and ferns, things that are easy to take care of because because of the volume I have. Inside of this cabinet is one of my favorite collections. So a lot of people think that I collect tons and tons of taxidermy. When I don't, I just collect things that I think are cool. So in here we have eggs, and I love eggs because they're amazing. Some of these are real eggs. Some of these are replica eggs. Like this egg here is a hog's egg, so that would not be a real egg because it's not legal to possess those. But this is made of wood, and my friend Lupa made this. I think they're really cool. I've got a replica hummingbird egg, which is so cool because their eggs are really tiny. And some of my favorite eggs, some of my favorite real eggs are this cassowary egg, which I'll kind of bring into the light. I've used museum gel to put it on this little egg stand here so it doesn't fall down. So don't want anyone gluing their eggs to their stands. That's museum gel there. And then this egg, which is another really cool one, is a Tianamu egg. And these are really great. It's kind of hard to tell in this light, but you can see they're like kind of iridescent and they're super shiny. And compared to like a chicken's egg even, or compared to any of these eggs here, they all sort of have a matte, finish or a matte texture. And the shininess and iridescence of that egg is unique to that bird. And scientists have sort of doing all these studies about how these eggs are, what these eggs say about the insides of these birds' bodies. So really interesting. We can learn a lot from eggs. This here is just my couch. It's a big, comfy, fluffy couch. I've got my birdie wallpaper in the back. A lot of people think of deer heads and they think of taxidermy. And for the longest time, I was like, I don't want a deer head. But this is an antique albino deer, which a friend had. And I was like, you know what, that deer really speaks to me. It has such charm and such character that I was like, I never thought I'd be getting a deer head for my home, but here I am. I've got a deer head in my home. But it has such charm and character. And what I like is that he's not like the biggest, or he's not really like a trophy. He's just sort of handsome how he is. And that's really, I don't know, that really speaks to me. Over here, I sort of have a little side curio, or a little side area that displays a few things that I love. I've got coasters. Of course, my coasters have birds on them too, because I just love birds so much, these little Audubon coasters. I've got some more old books. I've got this copy of Wood's Natural History, which is I just love the cover, and you know, the design, like the content of the book is great, but the design of this book is it's so stunning. It's so striking. You know, I think that there's like the way they used to market natural history and educational materials is just super, super interesting. And then below that, I've got this sort of little birdie stained glass lamp, and I kind of tuck all my books and remote controls inside of that thing too, because let's face it, we're living in the modern world. And my cat has made an appearance today. So this is not taxidermy. This is my cat here, and he'll probably want to not be pet too long. This is one of my favorite pieces here by Under My Mantle and TV. This is a bird screen. It's called, or a fire screen is what they would call it. People would place this in front of their fireplaces, but of course not with the fire happening, because heat is very bad for taxidermy. But this has a bunch of South American birds in it. And this piece it's really special. Of course, it's an antique. But it's incredibly striking, and whether I don't have quantity of taxidermy, I sort of have pieces like this that are just so special and are such, there's just so much labor involved in doing something like this. And I just find the stories behind it fascinating. And my favorite bird in here is this red-legged honey creeper, which is this blue bird here. It's a blue bird named for its red legs. And what's so interesting about that is I worked on a few honey creepers before, but this specimen is so much larger than anything I've ever seen. And recently I read a study about birds getting smaller, so I wonder if that is part of it. Some more birdie things that I've collected here. This is a display dome that has, I'll probably turn another light on to see this. Okay, yeah, way better. So this is a display dome that has South American birds in it. I've got it set up by a mirror, and I've got some books and stuff around it, and some little knickknacks that I like, a little lamp. This piece here is a fan that is from, I believe it's from the 40s or 50s, but it's made from macaw feathers, from domestic macaw feathers, of course. And I just think it's such a cool piece because, you know, someone just lovingly crafted this, and it's so incredible. It's made from shed feathers. And I actually, excuse me, I actually got this from a friend who sells vintage clothing. She has a shop called Crazy Autos Vintage, and she happened to have that. It's not clothing, but I was so drawn to that object, and I was so drawn to the craft behind it that I was like, I need to put that in my collection. And then down here in this cabinet, I've got a few bird skulls, and these are mostly skulls that are from species that I've worked on, where the client has wanted a replica head, or where I've used a replica head because I wanted to keep and clean the skull. And then another thing in here is this white peacock, which is another antique piece. And let me see what else I've probably finished. Oh yeah, I've also got I also keep little brass things. I collect a lot of bird art or bird related art. So I've got these little brass birds from my friend at Feather and Foxglove. And I try and keep lots of greenery around. And some of the flowers, I have to say, some of the flowers in here are real flowers, and real plants, and some of them are silk. Again, continued from upstairs, sort of a continuation from upstairs. Another piece I've got that's probably interesting to people is this little deer fawn, which is, it's probably not the best piece of taxidermy, but it has so much character, and it's one of the first pieces that I bought to collect. So I guess we'll do a last round of my living room if anyone has questions about anything.
Yeah, love it. People are loving your living room. And
thank you.
Yeah, it looks like some people might want to think about starting their own taxidermy collection. What advice would you give those looking to start out? What makes the difference between a quality piece and a not so great piece?
So I would say that if you're starting a taxidermy collection, to kind of think of why you're collecting it and what you want to get out of the collection, because to me, a typical collector's mentality, or a typical mentality of someone who is oh, I just want a bunch of everything. I just want one of everything, or I want just to have a lot of things for no reason. I don't think that is really the best thing to do. I feel you'll want to, you kind of want to ask yourself why do I want this object? Why am I drawn to it? And I think that's probably the first thing to think of. And as far as quality, there are so many things to look at. If you want something good quality, it's going to cost a lot, even if it's an antique. You don't get anything good for cheap, and you don't get anything, if you get something cheap, it's probably too good to be true, or there might be issues with it. So you're going to have to sort of, I would say, to do research about, if you're interested in collecting a certain period of time of taxidermy, to do research about that period of time, to do research about that time period, see what the different makers' marks are, and learn about the different techniques that were used, and then that way that will inform the kind of piece that you buy. So another thing I was going to say, the other thing too is, and I know a lot of people are worried about sourcing and things like that. And if you're buying new taxidermy from a taxidermist, they will be honest with you about sourcing. They're not going to tell you where, the exact place they get things from, because if I told you the exact people I work with, where I get all of my specimens from, then other people are going to get them from there too. So there's sort of like, there's a bit of guardedness as far as like giving you the exact name and address of, you know, the person I bought, you know, this bird from, as far as like frozen specimens that I get. However, most taxidermists will tell you that, you know, this is the bird that was raised domestically and passed away, or, you know, this is the fawn that was stillborn at a, you know, that was stillborn at a farm and then it passed away, or, you know, they will tell you that. And as far, oh, the other thing to look out for with taxidermy is you'll see in my place, you'll see a lot of, I don't know if you'll see one here, but I kind of tuck them away. But you'll see a lot of these things hiding around, which are not very cool looking, but these are moth traps. And they also catch any kind of, most of mine have like little pieces of lint or feathers in them. And what those do is trap any moths that will eat your taxidermy. And moths are attracted, they're kind of attracted to taxidermy for the same reason as our fur coats and wool sweaters and stuff like that. They want to, I'm gonna go down to our next room while I'm answering this question. But the moths are attracted to taxidermy because, you know, they're attracted to the animal fiber. They're attracted to, you know, the same thing as our fur coats and wool sweaters. They want to eat that fiber. So even if there's not a lot of meat and goo and tissue and stuff in your taxidermy, which there shouldn't be, they're attracted to that tissue. So, or they're attracted to that fiber. So to protect from moths, I use those moth traps, and they're basically monitoring the problem as opposed to fixing the problem. They're just trapping any moths, and they have a pheromone in them, and they're not toxic. So a lot of people think of moth control as mothballs and things like that. And those can be used, but they're really toxic. So you have to be really, really safe when you're handling that. So if you're starting to collect taxidermy, you want to make sure you keep your home dust-free and clean, and, you know, monitor for moths. And with antique taxidermy especially, you'll want to even like quarantine it for a bit, either in a bag or, you know, in a separate room that's sealed up, or in a tub or somewhere that that you can seal it up and kind of quarantine it for any infestation that might happen. So that was a long answer. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Let's it looks like you moved to your workstation for a lot of
We've moved to my workshop. So I'll switch around here. And so this is sort of the least decorated but most functional room of my home. So this is where whereas upstairs I do all of the finishing work and all the painting and the display and stuff like that. Down here is where it's actually where things are put together from the beginning, from the raw state. So here I have a lot of tools. Basically in taxidermy, you have specialist tools, but then you also have tools that are repurposed from other industries. So anything you see here, most of the stuff is stuff you can find at a hardware store. So I don't work on anything very large. Most of the things I work on are small birds or small mammals. So all of my tools are geared to the size of specimen I work on. So here you can see I just have a bunch of wire, pliers, screwdriver, respirators, everything, you know, everything like that. I have little bins where I keep fabrics and leathers and studs and just assorted findings. In here, these are the two main materials I use to make taxidermy forms. There's foam, and in this foam bucket, I have just blocks of foam for carving. I also have cast forms like this rat form. There's this bird form here, and this is just a commercially available form that you can buy from a taxidermy supplier. But you can see it's not very detailed, so I'd have to go back in and add detail to this and make it specific to the bird I'm working on. And then in here, I have a material called binding that I use for binding. It's called wood wool. And it basically looks like straw. This is a very ancient material in the world of taxidermy. So this is used for making forms as well. And what you do is kind of wet this a bit and then compress it and wrap it around. I also have sisal in here. This sisal isn't always hot pink, but I found this hot pink one and just had to have it. So I got that. I got that sisal as well. And those are used for those are used for making forms. And I'll kind of show you the kind of form that they make. But this is a bird form I made using the wood wool and sisal. and some cotton. So you can see that it's bound up, and it's a pretty, like, even though it's a soft material, this form is pretty hard. Like, I'm squeezing it with all my might, and I really can't warp it. So those are used to make forms like this. And that's a bird form over there. And then since we're here, this is my workbench. So this is a bench where I do all my sculpting, all my carving. You can see it's really messy. It's got all the paint splatters on it. So this is where I do any of the messy parts of the process. A lot of people think the skinning is the most messy part of taxidermy, but the sculpting honestly is way messier, because if I'm using wood wool, that little dust gets everywhere. If I'm carving foam, or if I'm carving balsa wood, that dust gets everywhere. So having the respirator definitely helps. And just having a big, having this workbench definitely helps. This is probably about an 8-foot workbench. And I actually built it myself because I knew the space I was going into, and I knew I didn't need anything fancy. And this cart below just has my airbrush. It has a drill, a Dremel, a blow dryer, just those sorts of things. And let's go back over, I think over here, you'll see I've got sort of a somewhat a little more decorated place. But these are just pieces that I have that I've made for markets, or pieces that are getting ready to get shipped, and just, books and a few plaster casts and things like that. And then we'll go down this little hall. It's not even a hall, it's sort of just like around the corner. And then over here is this is where like the skinning and fleshing happens. So you can see it's just this space was, this was used as a little basement bachelor pad. They had this little kitchenette down here. There was no stove or anything, so I converted it into my little taxidermy studio, because all I would need is, for skinning, all you need is just a clean surface, a surface that you can bleach and disinfect very thoroughly. So it's very minimal. There's just nothing decorative here. I have a little flower down here to just make it a little less deathy, but that's just for me. Then I've got all of my tools on these magnetic racks. So you can see it's a bunch of scalpels. They're all handles. Not all of them have blades on them. I'd put the blades on when I use them. Lots of different kinds of tweezers, just specialty scissors and non-specialty scissors, honestly, just different scissors. And then some larger knives and modeling tools. These scissors here are used as fleshing scissors. So you can see the curved tip. So these are used to sort of thin out hides and stuff like that. So I have this larger pair, and of course I have the smaller pair, which is basically like cuticle scissors. They're used in the same manner. It's kind of hard to put them back straight when I'm like looking through the camera. It's sort of a funny little perception. And that sink is just a sink that I use exclusively for taxidermy stuff. But it all has to stay pretty clean down here, because you don't want it to, and the other stereotype about taxidermists is that they're dirty. Well, they really shouldn't be. Your taxidermy shouldn't be smelling. It shouldn't be dirty. And your space should be fairly clean. And this here is where I do some fleshing. So this machine here, there's like a trash can there. There's some plaster and some sculpting mediums in those cardboard boxes. And then I have these buckets. These buckets I use for washing and for mixing. I have these trays that I use as work trays. These wonderful little polka dotted towels that I use to dry things off. And then this machine that I'm going in on here, this is a fleshing wheel. So I can't show you the operation one-handed, but you can imagine as this wheel turns, I'll turn it on for you to show you. As this wheel turns, I would pass a hide, an unclean hide under here, and this wheel would scrape off all of the fat from that hide, and it would splatter onto this guard here. Now, what I usually do is put cardboard or newspaper or just some kind of scrap onto this guard, so that I'm not constantly wiping this guard down. And it also just keeps things a bit cleaner, because fat can be really hard to dissolve. So I'll turn this on and show you how it works. But it's basically a wheel. And if you can imagine, I won't put my hand on it because it'll scrape me, but it'll just pass the hide underneath that. And it's just a wire brush. There are also machines like this for people who work on more mammals and larger mammals. There are also machines like this that are much larger and are more of a knife. So it's like a wheel with a knife. And then above it, I've got an extra light because, We love light down here. Where I'm nice and moody upstairs, I'm nice and bright down here. So I've got extra light so I can see what I'm doing at all times. And yeah, and in these cabinets, I keep all of my chemicals and stuff and store all of the taxidermy chemicals, which are, again, they're not really, taxidermists nowadays don't really use anything super toxic. Over here, I've got my freezer. So this is a list of all the specimens I have in this freezer. And this is the freezer itself. So it's really, there's really not much to it. It's basically a stand-up freezer. And it does me well. It serves me well. So there's that. And we'll turn back around. And this is pretty much, yeah, this is some artwork I have in here is the Audubon print above another freezer where I have another list. So that is pretty much this space down here. So it's not really, oh, go ahead.
Oh, amazing. I was going to jump in. We have a couple of questions here at the end. There's some people who want to know, looks like there's a lot of work that you put in. How many pieces do you usually create, like, in a year? And for those that want to follow up and maybe purchase some of your work, what's the best place that they can go to follow you and perhaps buy a piece?
Sure. So I probably do like 40 to 60 pieces a year. I haven't really counted before, and it can change year to year. Of course, this year we're not doing there are no large gatherings and large events for everyone's safety. So I'm not really creating as much volume in pieces. So I would usually make a ton of pieces for art markets and oddities markets and events like that where people buy things. So this year I'm probably making less pieces. So yeah, that's around the number of like commissions I have per year. And to learn more and to follow me, you can follow me on Instagram at Gotham Taxidermy. Those of you who are interested in learning taxidermy, or if you just have a lot of questions about taxidermy, I have a learning and resources section under there, which people have found very helpful. So yeah, go check that out and feel free to follow me in any of those places.
Oh, wonderful. So Gotham Taxidermy on Instagram and gothamtaxidermy.com, best places to learn more about Divya and her wonderful taxidermy. Divya, thank you so much for being with us and showing your amazing home and studio. I think we all learned a lot more about taxidermy. And for those of you who are watching from home, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to see more videos like this, please follow the Weird Home Store on YouTube. Subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff, and you'll see one of these every week. And Divya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun. I hope everyone learned something.
All right, everyone, have a great night. Bye.
Good night.